Hello, everybody. Happy Sunday afternoon, Super Bowl Sunday afternoon. Hope yours is going well. We've got another Seahawks video to get to today, but first, we have just hit 2,490 subscribers. Yes, I said 90. For some reason, this hasn't updated yet, but YouTube tells me we have hit 2,490 subscribers. Shout out to all the subscribers, and of course, special tip of the cap goes to the channel members, especially elite channel members Y2KHA, Brendon, Mikel, Scott, Todd, Hasher for MVP, VGK Tiger 75, Salacious, Crumb, Ryguy 1218, and Brendan Nelson's haircut. So today's video is one that I had more than one person suggest that I not even do, because the player that is the subject of today's video is one that is in kind of a different position compared to the other players that I've discussed in this series so far. We're doing KJ Wright, and I did decide to go ahead and make this video because however much I don't want to re-sign KJ Wright, however much I think it would be a very bad idea to sign KJ Wright, it's still possible. It can happen. And you know what? He had a really good year in 2020. He played really well for us. I think he even played well in the playoff game where we lost. So to just ignore KJ Wright as a possible re-sign target in 2021 just because I don't want to re-sign him and I think it would be a really bad idea to re-sign him, well, I don't really think that's fair. So everybody's going to have their different stances on what we should do with KJ Wright in the 2021 offseason. I think this is one where a lot of people are going to say we need to move on. He's kind of in a different position from the other players we're looking at because KJ is pretty clearly either out of or just exiting his prime. The other players we have talked about for the most part are either entering or have already entered their prime, or have just entered their prime. So discussing KJ is going to be a little difficult, but we're going to give it a shot. So let's dive into KJ Wright. So he is 31 years old right now, going to be 32 next year, which puts him in a bit of an odd situation in terms of free agent contract negotiations. This will be his, I think, fourth contract with the Seahawks, actually, if he gets one, which that's pretty impressive. You usually don't get to 4 contracts as a defensive player. So let's take a look at what he did in 2020 and try to figure this out. So he played in every game. He played, I think, over 85% of the snaps. So he played a lot last year. And let's take a look at some of the basic raw stats. He had 86 total tackles, pretty good. He had 11 tackles for loss, which was actually very effective. He had 2 sacks. He had 10 pass deflections and an interception. He forced 1 fumble. He recovered 2 fumbles. So in terms of these stats, you can see that he had a pretty good and pretty effective season. Not a Pro Bowl quality season or anything like that, but he played quite well. And as for his advanced stats, let's take a look at these real quick. You can see that he was targeted, actually not as much as he was in previous seasons. He was targeted 66 times. He allowed a lot of completions, and he allowed 4 touchdowns. But he only allowed 416 yards in coverage, which is actually pretty respectable for a guy who finds himself in coverage as much as he does. Also, and this is something that's going to make it rather hard to really evaluate KJ Wright because there aren't that many other players you can compare him to. He's not a big factor when it comes to pressuring the opposing quarterback. Now, in this most recent year, he actually blitzed 72 times, which is more than he usually does, I think, and a lot more than he did in 2019. And he did have 6 QB pressures, which is kind of substantial for him, but compared to some of the other players we could look at, it's not very close. So KJ Wright had a good season, but it's going to be hard to find guys we can compare him to try to size up what kind of contract he's going to need, because 4-3 outside linebackers who basically play like middle linebackers, who basically play the run, they play coverage, and they're not exactly getting after the quarterback all that often. There aren't a ton of high-profile guys like that left, and the ones that we do have left tend to not get a ton of attention. KJ, despite his advanced age, actually is maybe one of the best examples of a player like this still. So, real quick, Pro Football Focus grade. I'm not going to put a ton of stock into these, but I will say 75 PFF rating, very good. Now, let's go to the list. Let's try to find players we can compare KJ Wright to, and our problem is immediately going to become very obvious. If you sort by outside linebacker, you will take a look at these top value contracts. You will see players that KJ Wright doesn't have anything in common with. Khalil Mack makes $141 million, but he is a pass rusher. Von Miller, pass rusher. D Ford, pass rusher. So we got to scroll through a bunch of these names before we start getting to guys who, A, are not primarily pass rushers, and B, aren't comparable to KJ Wright in that they are just starting to leave their prime. So a player like Shaq Thompson, who might be a decent comparison for KJ Wright, it doesn't really work when he was 25 years old when he signed this contract. So I don't think we're going to be able to use that. So we're going to keep going, and we're going to stop here at number 12, Jamie Collins, who last offseason signed a 3-year, $30 million deal with the Detroit Lions. And again, we are kind of trying to fit a round peg into a square hole here, but this is reasonably close. So let's take a look at Jamie Collins, what he did in 2019 to earn the 3 years, $30 million. He had a really good year with New England. He was more of a pass rusher than KJ Wright has ever been, with 7 sacks. But that was actually something of an aberration for his career. If you take a look, he's usually been around, a handful of sacks a year, not radically different from KJ. So this is going to work pretty well for our purposes. He had 81 total tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 3 interceptions, 7 pass deflections, 3 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, and he was targeted a little bit in coverage, not nearly as much as KJ because his role was just a little different. He blitzed more, he got to the QB a lot more. And in coverage, he played pretty fine. The 3 interceptions helped a lot. So we're at least in the ballpark. I'm not going to say that Jamie Collins is an amazing comp for KJ Wright, but we're at least kind of getting close here. So after taking a look at his general statistics, it's safe to say Jamie Collins in 2019 was a good deal better than KJ Wright was in 2020. And if you take a look at his PFF grade, it's a little higher, 75 point, basically 76. Again, I caution you about PFF, but I think that we've kind of encountered KJ's ceiling. All right, let's keep going through the list. After Jamie Collins, we're going down to number 14, Demario Davis, who signed a 3-year, $27 million contract with the Saints in the 2020 offseason last year. So $9 million a year. So we've gone down a little bit, but roughly similar. So Demario Davis in 2019, what did he do? He made the Pro Bowl for one. He had a lot more tackles, 111. He had 11 tackles for loss, same as KJ. I think he had 4 sacks, so not exactly the best part of his game, but it's not too far off from being comparable to KJ. And he also had 1 interception, same as KJ, 12 pass deflections, pretty similar. And advanced stats say his coverage was a decent amount better than KJ. His effectiveness on the blitz was actually pretty similar because if you take a look at, blitz success rate, he actually has a lot in common. The most staggering thing here to me is that he had 111 tackles in 2019, but only 5 missed tackles. That's pretty freaking good. So, yeah, I think we are still talking about a player here that is better coming off his 2019 than KJ is coming off his 2020. But we're talking about a player that plays similarly. So I think we're at least barking up the right tree here because we all understand that in the modern NFL especially, pass rushers that's what counts out here. You want to stock up on elite pass rushers. Pass rush is always going to be a more valuable commodity than a linebacker who mostly just plays the run and plays coverage. So by looking at these players, we can get some idea of what KJ might demand in the market. So Demario Davis, I think he's another player who is clearly a cut above KJ coming off this season, and his PFF grade would definitely agree. His 2019 season, he had a PFF grade of 90, which is the highest we've seen so far for any player, I think. So yeah, Demario Davis had this season, this Pro Bowl season, to earn the 3 years, $27 million. So I don't think we're quite there yet for KJ. He's got to scroll down a little bit to find the right comparison that could get him paid. So let's go down a little bit more, down to AJ Klein. And because after you get to AJ Klein, you quickly start running into players who cannot be used as a comparison because they're no names or they're on their rookie deals. We're going to go ahead and call it a video after we take a look at AJ Klein. So last offseason, he was 28, so a little younger than KJ, but relatively comparable. He signed a 3-year, $18 million deal, $6 million a year. And let's see what he did to earn that the previous year. He was a Saint in 2019, played in 15 games, 69 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 1 interception, 2.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 2 pass deflections. We're kind of close. That is like a slightly poor man's version of KJ Wright's 2020, if you just take a look at the overall stats. And taking a look at the advanced stats, you can see that in coverage, it was pretty darn close, actually. Around 400 yards, 4 touchdowns. Completion percentage was a little lower, but in most regards, this was actually very similar to the year that KJ just had. 7 QB pressures. He's similarly kind of a non-factor when it comes to trying to rush the QB. So AJ Klein seems to be kind of the floor here because, hey, he in 2019, you can take a look at the way he played. You can take a look at the numbers he put up. They're very similar to what we saw from KJ in 2020. So I think we've kind of zeroed in on the kind of players you can compare KJ to who have recently signed contracts. So just to polish this off, and here's something that's very interesting. AJ Klein's PFF grade in 2019 was actually very bad, not even 48. So PFF would tell you that he shouldn't even have been really playing very much, much less a full-time starter for a defense. So again, I encourage everybody to take PFF grades with a grain of salt, but it is very interesting that his grade was so bad in 2019 that it seems to suggest he should not really have been playing football at all. So that is the floor. KJ Wright should probably be asking for more than AJ Klein got, the 3 years, $18 million, but he should be asking for less than Demario Davis got. So somewhere in between there. So I'm going to say the deal that KJ Wright has earned with his play last year is going to be somewhere around 3 years, $20 million or some equivalent. You have to take off a little bit because he's a good deal older than these guys, or well, he's a little bit older than these guys. He's not a pass rusher in any capacity, really, so he definitely loses some value compared to somebody like Jamie Collins, who has shown at least a little spark in that area. But I think we basically hit on a decent number here. If KJ actually wants to try to break the bank this offseason, I think you're going to be looking at something like 3 years, 20 million, 3 years, 21 million, maybe 2 years, 13 million, something like that. So I want to reiterate, I don't want KJ back. I want him to go somewhere else and finish out his career, especially because he's made it clear he wants money. He wants the big bucks. But just for the sake of argument, if he does stay, I think this is basically what he's going to ask for. 3 years, 20 million, or some equivalent. And with that, I'm going to get out of here. Peace out. Go Hawks. See you guys after the Super Bowl. And yeah, that's what I got for this one.